One particular body or profession of individuals that may have had as much impact as any other group in America in securing American independence was pastors. Not only had they talked about all these issues in the pulpit, but when it came time to actually go on the battlefield and fight, they were at the forefront of congregations. Pastors were
clergy.
Right out front. I'll give you a great example. We all learn in school about the story of Paul Revere writing to let them know the British are coming.
Right.
There's a lot more to that story than we hear. I mean, in several ways. Not only on the pastor side, but also writing that same night with Paul Revere was an African-American patriot named Wentworth Cheswell. Now, it turns out that Revere is headed to the west to let them know the British are coming. Wentworth Cheswell went north to let them know the British are coming, but the two took off. And we hear about Revere because the British actually did go west and not north. Well, where is it that Revere is writing to let the Americans know that the British are coming? He's writing to the home of one man, the Reverend Jonas Clark. That's where he's headed, one place. Why Clark's home? Well, he was in Lexington. The British were going to Lexington to take the stores there and take the ammunition, the stores of supplies they had. So he's writing to let Reverend Clark know. Oh, why not let the mayor know or something? No, he's writing to let Reverend Clark know. Why Reverend Clark? Because that night, John Hancock and Sam Adams were staying with Reverend Clark, which they did all the time. The Reverend Clark was the most significant political leader in that community. As a matter of fact, he's the one who helped write the resolutions for Massachusetts to separate from Great Britain, become part of the United States of America. He's the guy that was sent to help write the state constitution for Massachusetts. Here's a preacher involved in all this. So here comes Paul Revere. They finally get word, and when word arrives for Sam Adams and John Hancock that the British are coming, those two turned to Reverend Jonas Clark and looked at him and said, "Pastor, are your people ready?"
Wow.
And he says, "I've trained them for just this very moment." So when the call went out, the alarm bell rang that the British were coming. And by the way, the alarm bell that rang was the bell in his church that rang to let him know the British were coming. 150 people gathered there to meet the British. They gathered at his church, led by him, and they were out of his church. It was his church that gathered to fight the British. Well, it turned out the British didn't come on the first alarm. So the second alarm sounds, and they regather, and there's Jonas Clark at the church. And so they go out on the green to fight the British, and he made real clear that, listen, God blesses a defensive war. He doesn't bless an offensive war, so don't you fire the first shot. Wow. And that was real simple. If they fired us, let them have it, but don't you fire the first shot. And so when that first shot was fired, by the time the volley was over, the shot heard around the world, by the time it's all over, what you have is 18 Americans laying there on Lexington Green. 8 of them were dead, 10 of them were wounded. All of them were out of his church. And so here, Paul Revere is writing to find this preacher, because that's where the patriot leaders are, is with this preacher. And when it comes time to fight, it's the preacher that gets the church to go out there and defend their rights. Well, as the British start moving from Lexington back to Boston, along the way, they find the closer they get to Boston, the more opposition they find. It wasn't just fighting 100 Americans out at Lexington. By the time they get back to Boston, there's several thousand Americans lining the road, sniping at them from both sides with rifles. Where'd those guys come from? Wentworth Cheswell, the patriot, strong Christian, black American who went north to warn them, let them know the British are coming, so they got together and came south to meet the British. So as the British are coming back along the road to Boston, he's put out the alarm, and all these guys are gathered along. And it's amazing how many of the groups along the road were pastors who went and grabbed their own rifle, assembled their church, and took their men to meet the British as they were coming back. So Jonas Clark is one example. By the way, this is the sermon that he preached the very next year after Lexington. This is Pastor Clark. This is a very famous sermon that he delivered and gave. And this particular sermon is recounting the one-year anniversary of what the British did to start the American Revolution. It's his congregation, his folks. And I tell you, his eyewitness account is pretty remarkable on what happened.